Hi, everyone, and welcome to WiST Presents How I Got Into Sports Tech. Sydney, Sid, and I are WiST team members and are really excited for you guys to join us today, alongside with Lauren and Riley. So yes, we're the Lid, Sid, and Sid show. Flows nicely. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with WiST, Women in Sports Tech, we're a nonprofit created to drive growth opportunities for women at all stages of their careers throughout the sports tech and innovation landscape. Today's webinar, WiST Presents How I Got Into Sports Tech, was created to provide a platform for discovery and discussion. After a successful and exciting start in Bradenton, we're already counting down for the next WNBA season. We're excited to have Lauren, who is in the Wubble, and Riley, who previously worked for the WNBA champions, the Seattle Storm. So joining us today to discuss all things WNBA. Some housekeeping, if you have any questions during the webinar, you can use the Q&A feature on the bottom. So submit any questions that you have. And then we'll also be sending out a post-webinar email to recap our discussion. So you don't have to scramble writing things down. So we'll take care of that. But no, I'll leave it to Sydney to introduce Riley and Lauren.
Thanks so much, Lydia. And thank you, Riley and Lauren, for joining us today. So I'm going to start with Riley. Riley Foreman is currently pursuing her MBA at the MIT Sloan School of Management after spending 2 years with the WNBA Seattle Storm, where she oversaw public relations. Prior to joining the Storm's front office, she worked in ESPN's Stats and Information Group as a senior researcher supporting live studio and event broadcasts. Lauren Dwyer joined the WNBA on February 24th. Thank you for the specific date, as the basketball administration lead in league operations. She joined the WNBA after 2 years at Sportradar, where she was the director of digital sport, working with Sportradar's enterprise media clients. Before that, she worked at Columbia University in athletics development, Go Lions, where she also played basketball as an undergrad and received her MBA. So with that, I guess let's get going. To start, can you both share how you got into sports tech?
Go ahead, Riley.
Yeah, so I grew up in baseball's Moneyball era. So I always had this long love of sports and numbers. So halfway through college, I was really trying to figure out what to do with a math degree. And thought back to Moneyball. I also think like the movie with Brad Pitt had just come out around that time, and applied to ESPN Stats and Info Group as first a summer intern, and then wound up coming back full time. So that's kind of how I got my foot in the door of sports tech.
And for me, I played basketball, like Sydney just said, at Columbia. Loved the sport, loved being a fan of all sports. And after working at Columbia in athletics development, which is raising money for all our sports programs, and getting my MBA, I took a few classes as part of my MBA that were more sports focused. So the sports analytics class, the business of sports, where the final project was evaluating a team franchise to buy, which is always a unique endeavor to do. So from there, after I got my MBA, I was looking for the next thing, and through some shout outs here through Dan Bravado, who I interned with at Van Wagner Sports Entertainment, got connected to Brian Josephs, who gave me a shot at Sportradar. So Sportradar is a sports data company. I was on the sales team, so selling that data to our media clients, but got very familiar with that data side of things, working on fantasy clients and other things with broadcasters and how they could use the data and what they were doing. And from there, came over to the WNBA, where I'm in league operations now. So doing everything that is on the court, anything that is basketball related, which is great. It involves some stats and analytics, which are always fun to sink my teeth into, and everything else that revolves around the actual product on the court.
That's awesome. I said one of the, everyone always says, what's the last sporting event you went to before COVID? And one of the last times I was with people at a sporting event was with Brian Josephs in Chicago for All-Star. So Sportradar is definitely, it's a great connection to have, even once you're at the WNBA, wherever you are in sports, everything they do is very awesome.
Love it. Ringing endorsement.
There you go. No, thanks for sharing those backstories. I think it's helpful for a lot of us if we're looking to get into sports tech, just to see what that journey looks like. Lauren, you were in the Wubble, so can you tell us about your experience in Bradenton?
Yeah, so part of the exact date from when I started, that was from my introductory bio to the WNBA team, because I just started. I got 3 weeks in the office before we started working from home, and then went down to the Wubble at the beginning of August. So the context there is I was going down and meeting a lot of people for the first time in my job, which was a lot of fun. Going down there, I was there for about 7 weeks, helping to run game day operations. So the unique thing down there, typically in a season, the teams are running their own home game day operations. For this season, the league ran all of that, and it's something that we don't normally do. So it was a learning curve certainly for me, and for a lot of us to figure out how we put on an entire season in a neutral site. We worked really closely with IMG Academy, with ESPN, our broadcast partners down there, and with everyone else. We hired a bunch of people from the Bradenton area, which was great. I was managing our game day staff, so the scorers table, the computer stats crew, the team attendants who were the ones running out on the court and making sure all the sweat was wiped up. So it took a lot to onboard all of them. We got really lucky, a lot of great people down there helping us put that on. But it was cool to be on the other side of things, where at Sport Radar I was helping distribute the data, and down in Bradenton I was managing the people who were collecting the data itself. So it was a really fun time. It was great to see a lot of amazing basketball. Our season was really, we put together a quality product on the court, a lot of great storylines, and not the least of which was the social justice focus as well. So really proud of the players and what they did to dedicate the season to social justice, keep the focus there, while also performing to at a really high level.
Awesome. That's a nice spot too, Bradenton. My grandparents lived there, so I've been there.
Definitely. It was very hot.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I can only imagine. And going off of that, how did sports tech play a major role in the restart?
All across the board. So thinking about the game day operations, like I said, I was on the managing all the scorers table staff and game day staff. So that was great to see all of that and how we were putting that together from a hardware standpoint, software standpoint. Working really close with the IT team that was down there. One thing that was always in the back of my mind, being in Florida and the weather, there was a lot of thunderstorms, a lot of tropical storms. So we had backups to the backups in case the Wi-Fi went out, in case the power went out, which it did a few times. And you're always just like, are we going to be okay? And we were. So that was a big success in my mind. And then from a health and safety standpoint too, I think kind of 2 things I'll highlight. One is I was managing all the testing and quarantine processes too when we were down there. So anyone who was coming into the Wubble as a new person had to go through a quarantine. So coordinating all of that, coordinating the pre-testing and the testing once we were down there. That was a lot of shared, secured documents, and coordinating schedules and everything like that. We also worked with ServiceNow, who were just announced as a partner, tracking everything that we needed on testing side, tracking symptoms and temperatures for everyone in the Wubble to make sure we were maintaining that baseline of health and safety. And the other thing I'll mention on that front is the uniqueness of the game day operations, where our scorers table was on the other side from where it normally is. So much plexiglass was involved and masks were involved. So there was a lot of work we did around the communication. So everyone had headsets. We had screens that were on the other side for the teams to be able to see all the stats that we had that were being live updated, as well as printers, because I don't know, we can't get away from printing stats every quarter, every time outbreak. So all those little things that we had to figure out within the parameters of the health and safety guidelines involved a lot of technology to figure out those solutions.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Lauren. So Riley, you were with the Storm for 2 years prior to leaving for business school. Can you share a little bit about what you did working with with the champions, the Seattle Storm.
Yeah, the Champions definitely has a nice ring to it. So I actually joined the Storm on the heels of their 2018 championship. I had flown out with ESPN to actually cover the final series that they swept the first 2 games in Seattle and then the next game, the game 3 in Virginia. And like 2 weeks later, I was in Seattle assuming this new role of public relations, which coming from like a pretty stats heavy background, I knew I was going to have a lot to learn, but I was really eager to sink my teeth into some of those challenges. I think the best part of the job is that it really was a split between the 2 things that I love, which is basketball and business operations. So I did get to be very close to the team, went to every practice, was on the road at every game. Except I didn't make it to the Wubble this year, unfortunately. I helped the team get started for the first month and then had to come out here to Cambridge for school. But and then on the other side of that, you're working, in the office in the off season, alongside the CEO, alongside ticket sales and sponsorships, and especially marketing. So I really got to see a lot of different things going on behind the scenes, but also have that front row seat at games at the scorer's table with Lauren. I know one thing I didn't realize was that the public relations director for teams actually like staffs the stats crew, for instance. So I was still very well connected to that. And then, as your primary function, you're really trying to tell the story about these incredible women and not just what's happening on the court, but also off the court. And I think based on my background at ESPN, I always wanted to tell those stories with numbers. So it was a matter of finding the most intriguing numbers and then being able to explain to media or fans or whoever it was why those were important.
Awesome. And yeah, just going off, we've been lucky to have another previous panelist who is with ESPN, Tiffany Kelly. I know she's here today. So I think there's a ton of talented women, hopefully, in the pipeline who are inspired to work in sports tech. And it sounds like sort of everything you did at ESPN led to where you were. So that's awesome.
Hi to Tiffany. We definitely worked closely at ESPN. She was kind of like, I think there was a branch of people that I really thought of as like the number crunchers. And I was more of kind of the liaison between those people and then the people that watch shows like SportsCenter. So it was really great to always go and chat with Tiffany or whoever else was working on new stats, like the Women's Basketball Power Index came about while I was there. So we used that during the women's Final Four to say what the probability of, a seed upset happening was, or UConn going all the way, which they didn't in like the 2 years that I worked the tournament. So had some fun with Tiffany and the analytics department for sure.
That's awesome to hear about. And just following up on your time with Seattle, we've heard a ton about how WNBA players have been leading the way for social change. Can you speak about what you noticed or what you saw firsthand when you were with the Storm for 2 years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a really big reason about, for me personally on joining the WNBA. I, unlike Lauren, did not grow up playing basketball and really wasn't exposed to women's basketball until I got to ESPN and was working on games. So really fell in love with that at, in my mid-20s, which I don't know if that's the same story for a lot of people. But I think part of it was really what they're doing off the court in terms of social justice. And I can say from being around the team and locker rooms at airports that these conversations that they're having, these conversations, not just when the camera's rolling, but in those spaces. And for me to come to the Storm and work for a league that is, the players are, I believe the last year's count was 80% Black women who are really pushing for social change. That was important to me. And also to work for a franchise in the Storm that is women owned and operated in terms of having 3 women owners and a woman CEO and CFO.
Awesome. And Lauren, can you speak about witnessing some of the social justice initiatives the WNBA players have participated in during the Wubble?
Definitely. It was incredibly powerful to be down there and be, really a part of it, right? It was my job to provide that platform that they could use. And we're so fortunate to have players who are doing the work. Like Riley said, it's genuine. They really care about this. They educate themselves, they educate others. They have these really strong calls to action. It's not just like we did put Black Lives Matter on the court, but it's beyond that, right? We did have Say Her Name on their shirts, but it's taking it a step further. We're not just putting that recognition out there. We're saying this is what you can do about it. And the players really walk the walk behind that too. So it was really great to see that dedication of the season to Breonna Taylor, to the entire movement for Say Her Name. And I think one thing that I'll always remember, it was when we didn't play for 2 days. We took the days of reflection. And personally, it was when I was down there, it was when I kind of tagged in for someone and he left. And so it was kind of like I was on my own, and that was the day that we didn't play. So that was kind of from a personal standpoint, I was like, okay, what do we do now? But I think we were able to take that moment, rededicate ourselves, the season, to the cause, remember why we were there, what we were playing for. And then that Friday when we started playing again, it felt that much more important, or that much more connected to say, yes, I'm here and I'm helping to enable all of these actions with this platform of basketball. This is how these women have such strong and seeing voices. I'm not saying that right, but the fact that they can reach so many people is because they are the best basketball players in the world. And I'm now a part of that and helping them use that platform to really create change in the world. So that was all of it. It felt great for me personally to be a part of it, to say that I was doing my own little part too.
That's incredible to be surrounded by all those positive and inspiring voices.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, we see just female athletes in general inspiring others. And my favorite part, that I've seen in the past 6 months is just female athletes sort of getting recognition for what they do and being put on the same sort of mentioned in the same conversations when you talk about Seattle athletes, not only talking about Russell Wilson, but talking about Sue Bird and some of the other great Storm players. So that's something that was great to see. So now we're going to transition and have Sydney with a C, our other WiST team member, ask a quick question as a graduate student. I think the next question will be relevant for her to ask, and then go to the speed round before we transition to audience Q&A. And just as a reminder, if anyone has questions, to submit via the Q&A feature.
Yeah, thank you. Riley, you were with the Storm and previously with the ESPN, as you mentioned, and decided to leave and pursue your MBA at MIT. So we think that it would be great for our listeners to hear a little bit about why you decided to make this move, and perhaps inspire some of them who want to get an MBA or another degree but are nervous to leave their jobs. As I am finishing up my last semester of grad school. And I came off of a gap year from traveling, and I was like, oh, it's time. But yeah, why did you decide to make this move?
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations. You are almost at the finish line, and that is very exciting and a huge accomplishment. But yeah, it was a really tough decision. Absolutely. Been very fortunate to work for 2 organizations that, I'm inspired to do the work every day and show up every day. I think the decision to apply to MIT specifically goes way back to when I attended the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference, first as an undergrad, and then as a representative with ESPN Stats and Info, and just saw all these amazing conversations about sports and analytics happening in one place. So I knew that I specifically wanted to come here to MIT. But yeah, kind of as you mentioned, I don't think there's ever really a perfect time. It was certainly a stressful time. I applied right as we were moving to work from home, and the season was kind of hanging in limbo. But I was really committed to the Storm to make good on this season, knowing though that I was leaving. I think what MIT offers and what business school in general offers is a 2-year time for me to kind of reflect on these two very different roles within the sports industry that I've had so far and kind of figure out what's next. When I talk about sports, I light up. So I think I definitely want to go back into that sphere. But who knows, it could be on the streaming side. I think there's a lot of opportunities to explore here.
Yeah,
I know
awesome.
Lauren too also had an MBA.
I did, yeah. And I think one thing that I'll chime in on for me that was unique is that I went to school while still working. So it is a slightly different decision that I made, where it's a lot easier from a financial standpoint, honestly, that Columbia helped pay for it since I was working there. But it's also really valuable and something that, it's not a small thing that pretty much every NBA or WNBA job position says master's degree preferred, JD or MBA. So check, got it. So that's important. And I think one thing that I really valued about the business school curriculum was the emphasis on strategy and looking at, how different businesses navigated different crises or different opportunities, and how can I apply that to the sports world. I think that's a big thing that I can bring now to my role.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into a follow-up question. How do you both plan to leverage your MBA when searching for your next role in sports tech?
Yeah, I think, I'm starting the recruiting process for summer internships, which seems crazy. I just took midterms last week. I'm like, everyone relax. But yeah, I think it's the alumni network. There's a lot of people in sports that have their MBA, like Lauren mentioned. So, being able to talk about that kind of shared experience will, I hope, certainly help. Yeah, Lauren, I don't know. You've already been able to leverage yours since you crossed that finish line a while ago.
Yeah, it's definitely the network and all the relationships that you can build through that. Sports, as we know, it's such a tight-knit community. It feels like I wanted to give out a ton of shout outs for everyone who's attending right now. Thanks guys, I love you. But it's who you know. And so using that network and those connections to have people out there who can vouch for you and say, yes, this person knows what she's talking about. She has the chops, she has the skills to do whatever the job entails is really important. And thinking about kind of the curriculum, like I was saying, the classes that I took, so I'll go back a little step further. My undergrad degree was American Studies, very liberal arts. I didn't take a single math class in all of undergrad. And the MBA was able to kind of show that, no, I'm actually pretty good at math, to quote Mean Girls, sorry. And so that was another important thing for me, was to have that, have a resume that showed on paper, yes, I passed the eye test, and then get to that next stage where I can show myself in person and show that I belong.
Yeah, I think that's a really great analogy too, to, athletes being recruited. Oh, I am Mean Girls. But yeah, passing the eye test is one thing, but being able to look at what are the stats saying on paper. So very similar in that way.
Awesome, thank you. And now we'll go to the speed round. So do you guys have any favorite books or recommendations for anyone listening?
Ooh, I just read Golden Gates, which, if you're interested in affordable housing, I would highly recommend.
It's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
I have 4, so I'll try to sum it down. One, from a fiction standpoint, one of my favorite novels of all time is 100 Years of Solitude, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Another one that I thought of in this context was Radical Candor by Kim Scott. It's more of a business book, but that notion of needing that or wanting to provide that feedback, but in a way where people know that you care about them. So having that relationship foundation first, and then being able to provide the feedback that someone needs to get to that next level, which I think is so important for women in sports, to not just be where you are and skating along, but actually get pushed to that next level and understand what we need. So that's something that stuck with me.
Awesome. Favorite podcasts?
Ooh, I have too many to sort there. Lauren, do you know one off the top of your head?
I don't listen to podcasts, but I read a lot of newsletters. So I was going to shout out, I really love the Axios Sports newsletter and Just Women's Sports newsletter, which I think both of them have podcasts too. So that kind of counts.
I guess I'm on the other side of podcasts. I listen to them all the time, no matter what I'm doing. As far as like sports ones, I love Burn It All Down, which focuses on women's sports. Definitely have to give a shout out, as Lauren's been doing, to some of my former coworkers. I really enjoy actually a WNBA player, Chiney Ogwumike, who didn't play in the Wubble season, but is a member of the Los Angeles Sparks. She has a nationally broadcast radio show, which I listen to sometimes if I miss it as a podcast, with Mike Golick Jr., who I actually worked on Golick and Wingo as one of the last assignments I had prior to joining the W. So, and because Janae's on the show, I think they do talk a lot more and give a lot more attention to women's sports. So that's always refreshing.
Love it. And that makes me think of, so I just listened to a podcast that featured my friend LJ and his Art But Make It Sports Instagram. So like that also kind of counts. But he's been doing a great job of featuring women's sports too, and his memes creation. So I like that too.
Yeah, I have definitely become like a podcast junkie during this time. Like my list went from like 1 to like 12 different types. And then our last one is there a sports tech trend or innovation that you are most excited about?
So mine for this is the innovation we're seeing around the virtual space. So fans aren't in person, but there's so much more that leagues are trying to do to connect with them, leagues and teams, I should say. And I think a lot of that is going to continue, right? We have so many more fans who watch games on TV, on streaming, second screens, than come in person. And so there's so much more that we can do to engage them. A couple of things that the WNBA did was the tap to cheer, where it got millions of taps, which is like mind blowing how people were so engaged with just tapping to cheer. It was incredible, but shows the real strength of that and the engagement you can generate around games. Another thing was our Twitter broadcasts that were really engaging, had really conversational hosts and guests that were current WNBA players, former WNBA players, who were coming on, interacting with fans. People were able to write in, feel like they were part of the broadcast too. So there's things like that I think are really driving forward that engagement for fans when they can't be in person. And that's going to continue to grow, I think.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you brought that up, Lauren, because I spent half of the season working as a WNBA employee and then had this weird transition to being a fan for the second half of the season. So I never had time to tap to cheer when I was trying to pull up stats in the middle of a game. And then that was like my nervous tick. I think that's why it was probably so popular. It was all these nervous fans like in the dwindling minutes of the game, just frantically tapping their phones. So yeah, it was really neat to be on the other side of that engagement. For me, I think, and you were there and probably a part of this, but it was a lot of the wearables, specifically connected to, monitoring health for COVID reasons. I think MIT is doing that at a slightly lesser scale. I think overall to me, I wear this Garmin watch almost all the time. And when I look at it, I'm really just concerned about like how many steps I've taken, have I left the apartment today? But it collects so much data. And I really don't even think about it because it's just sitting on my wrist. But similarly, you know, with the WNBA asking players to wear
The aura rings.
yes,
Yeah.
thank you, the rings this year to monitor COVID symptoms. You know, I think that one, they were kind of setting the example for the rest of the country and world, perhaps, in terms of like, this is what it's going to take to kind of get over this, is, you know, have this, collect this data on yourself and track how you're feeling. And it obviously goes beyond COVID into, you know, how you player tracking on the court. I know, Sydney, we've had a lengthy discussion about this outside of the webinar. But, you know, I think that that's something that's really relatable to all people, whether they're wearing a Fitbit or a Garmin, or just want to use data to kind of get past this together.
Definitely. And awesome speed round, Sid. Thank you for kicking that off and doing amazing there. And now we're going to transition to our audience submitted questions. So the questions submitted live and then also before the webinar. How do you both articulate your interest in sports on your resume, or recommend for our audience members, you know, how they might do it if they want to?
I can go quickly on that one. I think it's through some volunteer efforts or any extracurriculars that you put down. You know, I always have on there that I coached. It's been a couple of years since I volunteer coached, but I still have it on there to show that, like, yeah, this is important to me. And, you know, I can bring up in an interview that I play basketball and I'm the captain of my basketball team, which means I can organize a group of women to play basketball, which is not something like not nothing, right? So it's things like that. I think I also like to point out the relevant courses that I took to show that when I was in business school, I was seeking out those sports related experiences. So showing that I genuinely care and, you know, have action to back that up.
Yeah, I'll say my resume is definitely pretty sports heavy by this point. But when I was trying to break into the industry, when I was an undergrad and just applying to internships, I recall putting down that one of my extracurriculars was hosting a sports radio talk show just on our local liberal arts, you know, college station. And I could probably go back and ask this manager, but I believe that's why I got hired. Like, the interview was not going well. I was getting grilled on like the Dodgers bullpen and the history of things in sports that had happened before I was born. And then he brought up, oh, what's this radio station that you are a part of? So I was able to talk about, well, every week I put together some note, stats, and trends on what's happening in Seattle sports and talk about it with a co-host. And like, little did I know at the time, ESPN had a nightly recap of everything that had gone on in sports that day sent to the entire production unit, which is like 2,000 people, called Note, Stats, and Trends. So I didn't know that I was doing something that I would end up doing at ESPN. But yeah, that one little line on my resume, I think, helped me really land that job.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely helpful to portray that, because I think that was my mistake at first. I was really focusing on strength and conditioning coaching, but wanted to get more into tech and just figuring out a way to frame it on your resume. Thanks for that, for those tips. Next question, what area of sports tech do you think will be most crucial for teams to develop over the next decade?
So I have one that I think is specific to women's sports or emerging leagues, which is, you know, another shout out to Sport Radar, but it's that data collection and driving more on that. So it's kind of like the foundation of everything else that's to come. So for emerging leagues, the data collection can sometimes be an afterthought because there's so much else to focus on. But if there's a way to do it in a way that's cost effective, that's automated, doesn't require as much human manual labor to do, I think that will be really important because that will drive a lot of the coverage and the analysis that comes next. You know, one thing that I was just talking to someone about was how we can encourage more WNBA betting, people betting on the games and coverage for that too. And a key thing there is historical betting data. How do we start building up that database where people can say like, all right, we got the Seattle Storm versus the Las Vegas Aces, and here's what the line has been the last 10 times they've played, or the last 10 years. Well, Vegas hasn't been around for 10 years, but anyway, the last so many years they've played, and it doesn't exist yet. So if we can start building up that database and having that like kind of be the breaking down that barrier to entry for some of that coverage, I think will be huge. Not just for the WNBA, but for any new league, looking at like NWSL, looking at softball, looking at hockey, for the women's leagues, to make sure they have that as a priority and it's something that they can accomplish even with limited resources.
Yeah, and just having been the person that really relies on that historical data to be like complete and accurate, it's so critical. I think one of the things that I did right before I left the Storm was pull together like a complete and what I felt was pretty accurate, scrubbed it, spent a lot of time scrubbing it, like history of every single game they've ever played, and also was able to tie in Sue Bird's performance in the games that she had played. So down the road, when she retires eventually, I think she just turned 40, which is incredible.
Not retiring anytime soon.
Yeah, hopefully not anytime soon. You know, whoever is in my position that I was in will be able to draw upon that to help tell stories about Sue and what she meant, you know, what her legacy is on the basketball court, using those numbers. So it definitely took some time. This was, there was games really early on that I was no joke, like calling up the Library of Congress, looking through like old newspaper box score clippings to confirm that I had this stuff right. But it is that important to me. And I think we see that investment a lot on the men's sports. And sometimes, as Lauren was saying, like, it's not the priority when a new league or team is emerging, and it really needs to be, because it just helps you tell such richer stories with that data.
Definitely. And one thing we discussed, and I'm seeing a lot of questions from the panelists about sort of like what courses or skills they would recommend to get into sports tech. And I think, you know, for people interested in analytics, a big thing that, you know, people love to do is like just do another MBA analytics project. But one thing that I say is like, you know, there's a ton of data about the WNBA, and it's been less explored. There's been less projects. So instead of reinvent the wheel and do the same project that probably like 100 guys and maybe a few girls did, and have on their, you know, GitHub pages or whatever, whether it's in Python or maybe R or whatnot, to do some analytics, why don't you do a WNBA analytics project to sort of show your skills? Because you might add something new to the conversation and really impress someone, instead of do the same project that a ton of people have done about the NBA. And a shout out to, you know, WNBA stat site, which was revamped and has a lot of cool stuff for everyone to go see. So I'd recommend that too. And then transitioning to an audience submitted question, from LJ, Lauren's the friend that she shouted out.
Well, there you go.
Are there certain people or companies that are innovating in the women's sports space that you're a fan of and that we should be paying attention to?
I think, I'll just jump in real quick and say, when I was at ESPN, I got an email from like a non-ESPN email account, which I don't know if I was supposed to open that, but I'm glad I did, because it led to this great connection with the founder of Her Hoop Stats. So this person had actually been an undergrad at MIT, had worked in analytics for the Philadelphia 76ers, and, you know, had kind of, like me, stumbled upon this space that is women's sports. And we used Her Hoop Stats frequently to kind of take women's storytelling at ESPN to that next level. And it's neat to see, you know, teams and leagues. It's kind of modeled after KenPom, if anybody out there has been on KenPom, where it's like a pretty low annual subscription fee. So it's been neat to, you know, be able to reference Her Hoop Stats and talking with WNBA analysts, like the announcers that you hear on TV, they're familiar with this. This is a resource that they use. So I'm glad to see it kind of like grow in that private space as well.
Definitely. And I was going to say the same thing. I think there's a lot of sites out there that are really digging in on that. I would love for them to get more recognition and play. So there's Her Hoop Stats, there's Around the Timeline. Basketball Reference is doing a lot on the women's basketball side too, which is really, really appreciated, and getting more play on that. And WNBA.com/stats also has that. So it's kind of like we're starting to build that out. Another thing I have been following is all these new women's leagues, right? So NWSL has been doing a great job. NWHL is switching up a little bit. That's interesting. Softball's interesting. Athletes Unlimited and what they were doing with softball, what they'll do with volleyball and lacrosse, I think is really interesting. And it's something that I want to follow because I want to see if it works. I want to see if this format of, focusing on the individual player within a team sport and how it's changing up and what are the storylines and what are the fantasy points or the equivalent of fantasy points. How do fans engage with that and react to that? And can it be a sustainable model? I'm really interested in seeing how that works.
Yeah, and WiST, Tori Vidalis, she is was with softball and for Athletes Unlimited this past summer, and you get to choose like a charity or a nonprofit that's your sponsor, and she actually chose WiST, so that was really exciting to see. So yeah.
Awesome.
I'll leave it to Lydia to ask one more question. There's some awesome questions in the chat about like what conferences people should attend, and I'm gonna sort of message you guys after to get the answer to send in our post-webinar email, just so that we can get that out to our attendees today.
Yeah, no, thanks everyone for submitting these. They're awesome. It's hard to pick one. I guess we'll end it with this one. So what was one of the most challenging parts you found working in sports tech and the analytical part of the industry, and how did you deal with it?
Go ahead,
I
Ryan.
think, I think I really struggled. And I think part of this was coming in as a woman, like right out of undergrad, with a little bit of imposter syndrome. Did I know everything there was to know about sports? No. But I also had to, came to realize that the people I was working with also didn't know everything there was to know about sports. I was trained in math in undergrad, but that was very much like a theoretical understanding of math. So I think kind of Lauren has touched on this, but and some people have asked questions about this, but like going out of your way to be able to boost your skill set. This COVID season, one of the fun projects I did with my partner was code our favorite card game in Python. And I hadn't touched Python since my senior year of college. So it was really great to get back into that. And now I'm taking classes again in R. So where I felt like I had an area of weakness, I definitely sought to improve. But yeah, coming in, it was a little scary, not knowing if, just being a fan had been enough to that point.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking off that, I took an intro to Python class as part of my MBA. So I say I know enough to be dangerous, but like an intro to Python class is not going to put me at the same level as someone who works in Python. So I think it's also recognizing where, I didn't have to go into a conversation and be the expert. I needed to know what questions to ask. I needed to know how to phrase something, which is important. I needed to know, what was feasible or not when I was talking internally about well, can we do this with our data? So that was where it was recognizing my role as a salesperson. I'm not here to solve everyone's problems. I'm here to figure out where we can go, how I can connect the right people, how I can connect the dots based on what I do know. So it's curiosity to keep learning more and understanding what are the right questions to ask to get to that knowledge. But then recognizing that I can let the experts speak, right? I can connect them ask the right questions, tee it up in the right way, and then just listen. So I think that was something that I learned to have confidence in, where it's not going into a room and being like, well, I don't know anything, so I'll just sit here. It was, I'm here, I provide value. You also provide value. How can I get the most out of this meeting with all these minds brought together?
That's great. It's definitely important to be curious and keep asking those questions rather than just kind of being intimidated by everything. So no, I always find that helpful to hear about challenges and how you overcome that. I think that's all we have for the questions, but thank you so much, Lauren and Riley, for joining us today. This is great.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, WiST, so much.
And thanks to everyone who attended.
Yeah, and before we wrap up,
you.
I guess we'll take a quick panelist screenshot.
Oh, yeah.
And I think Lydia has a few wrap-up items, so I can take the
Oh, you got the picture? Okay, we're smiling now. Or... Great. Yeah, so everyone, we will be sending that post-webinar email just to give you a recap of the discussion and list those podcasts and books. And then the recording will also be on our website, which is new. So definitely check out our new WiST website. It looks awesome. And feel free to share that with any friends or anyone in your network. And then we'll be in touch with our next webinar, which will be in November. So hope to see all of you there. Thanks again, everyone.
And wait, let me just get one more screenshot. And then the last
Okay.
item is anyone who, we encourage everyone to vote. 10 days till our election. So everyone, all our attendees, encourage vote.
Love it.
Okay, I think I got it.
You got it? Okay.